All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our last class as far as the Google Hangout goes. Just wanted to remind everybody about making sure you get all your assignments in. If you look at the syllabus dates there, everything's coming to a quick end here soon. So I'll be spending the rest of my week grading the rest of the assignments I've got, and we'll get that going. I have also posted up a discussion board, the last discussion board. I accidentally posted it twice. Please go to the one that just says corrected one, or but if you write it either way, I mean, if you post on either one, I'm gonna look at both of them. So either way is fine. So anyway, tonight we want to just do a speak to you about local budgets and also about your school budgets. So let me start with the local budget here. Your local budget is after you've gotten your state funds, you have your local dollars, and your local dollars, generally speaking, statutorily, the superintendent has to make their recommendation to the board first. Then the board has to make their recommendation to the county commissioners. So when it's in our hands being the school staff, it's the superintendent's budget, and then once she or he takes that to their board, when the board approves that budget, it becomes the Board of Education budget, and then of course they present that to the Board of County Commissioners. Now the Board of County Commissioners have until the end of June to approve a budget, and there's a certain process here, and generally if there's not approval of a budget, or if the Board of Education, the Board of County Commissioners could approve their budget, but if the Board of County Commissioners approve a budget that's different from the Board of Education or is not agreed upon by the Board of Education, school board can elect to go to what's called mediation. Mediation is a process where you gather the two boards together, they have a joint meeting, they sort of present their sides, kind of like a court case, to one another, and then basically everybody that's in the room, it's an open meeting, then everybody's in the room kind of gets dismissed, and it's negotiations that take place with the county manager, the chair of the Board of Commissioners, superintendent, and the chair of the Board of Education. And they try to come to an agreement, and the budget is really two budgets. There's the ongoing current expense budget, which are the dollars that includes teachers or personnel. It includes instructional supplies, any of those sort of things that are day-to-day, year-to-year operations. And then the capital budget are things like new buses or school building repairs. That's the capital budget. And so there are two budgets that are approved by both the commissioners and the Board of Education and the commissioners. And so when they get to the end of that process here, if they can agree on one of the budgets but not the other budget, either the continuation budget or the or current expense budget, or they could agree on the capital budget, or they could be in disagreement on one or both of those. So that goes to mediation, either in one of those two areas or on both areas. And then if it's not agreed upon in mediation, they can't come to some kind of a negotiated agreement, then the Board of Education can vote for it to go to Superior Court. And I would really recommend that you go take a look at Union County versus Board of Education, versus Board of County Commissioners. We went through, and I mentioned this in a previous class, we went through a long process of budget dispute that's really not over with for this past year. There was no agreed upon budget last year. There was no mediation agreement. It went to court for 9 weeks, and there's lots of information, news clippings about the court case, and it was went to jury trial. The jury favored the Union County Public Schools, a $91 million lawsuit judgment by the jury. And so right now that's an appeal. It's at the appeals level. All the information has been sent down to the North Carolina appeals, and so it could be December before that is ruled on by the North Carolina appeals. And so We don't know what's going to happen after. We don't know what's going to happen with the appeal, and we don't know what's going to happen after the appeal at this point in time. But it is worth you kind of doing some, especially if you have any kind of aspirations for a principal level or beyond, to really look at that. You can go to the Union County Board of County Commissioners website. There are videos from the various meetings that took place last May and June. And then there's lots of news clippings regarding the actual court cases past fall. But the process is something that is hopefully meant not to take you to that point, but at this point in time, it is a way that if there is an agreement between the two boards, then you have some recourse after that. There actually is now state law that for the next couple of years, it says that Union County Board of Education that we cannot sue the Board of County Commissioners, and there is a certain specific guidelines by the state law on how to handle our budget for the next couple of years. I think that was meant as a stopgap by the senators in our district to sort of give some peace and some time in between for a couple of years. So anyway, that's some information regarding the local budgets as it pertains to current expense and as it pertains to the capital side of things. Once it's capital and current are approved, generally it's by before June 30th, then the dollars flow into the school system that we can use for all the projects that we normally do. With a current expense, I mentioned this in an earlier class too, a current expense budget is generally you start off with exactly the same amount that you received last year. So if you get, let's just say, $30 million the previous year for current expense, you start off with that same amount of $30 million, and anything brand new has to go get county commissioner approval. And then once it's approved, then that's your starting point. That's your base for moving on for the next year. On the other hand, capital is not. It's a year-by-year thing. You have to go to them every single year and ask for the monies to justify, or that are justified, you have to justify our needs for your school buildings, our needs for your transportation, and it's a 1 year only approval, and then you do it all over again the following year. So that is the general overview, a quick review on the local budget. Now let me talk a little bit about let's talk about the school. Now the school, schools generally participate in some process, the budget process for the whole school district. They generally provide some kind of a needs assessment for with regards to current expense and for capital that they provided their school system, that their school district, the local officials can determine what they recommend to the superintendent, what they recommend to the Board of Education. But there is feedback from the schools, generally speaking. Once a budget is approved, generally speaking, you would get a certain amount of money at the beginning of the year. But once different approvals, whether it's a state, you have to get, first of all, your local budget approval, but then you also have to wait for the state budget, because if the state raises things, let's just say the state gives a 5% raise to teachers or 11% raise to teachers, that you also have teachers that are locally paid. So then you've got to, if it's 11% for the state employees, those that are locally paid also have to get that same 11%. So the district has to look at what's the impact on the state budget on our current budget, which has generally been approved by the county commissioners before that hand. So usually you have things that impact your local budget that you didn't know about until after the state's approved it. So it takes CFOs a couple months to put all that together, and so they typically don't get budgets out to their schools until probably somewhere between August and October, depending on how late the General Assembly is. And the General Assembly is pretty late this year, so it's probably going to be September before that, if they get it approved this week, and they're hoping to get that approved to the state level. But you have your budgets. You have what they call a chart of accounts that comes from the state through the local government or local school board that charts each of the different accounts for as what it's called charts, each of the accounts for your district. You have, generally speaking, you have state allotments that are provided that could flow through the school district down to the school. Then you have your local dollars that flow through the school district down to the school, and so you'll receive different pots of money for certain things. You'll see a lot of times, it just depends on the school district, how you set it up, we get pots of money for what they call special projects dollars. It's some discretionary dollars. It's pretty much the only discretionary dollars principals have to spend, but it has to be for instructional use. You would get dollar amounts. Maybe you get dollar amounts for transportation. Maybe you get dollar amounts for copies. And so you, as the principal, it takes the leadership in making sure that they are following those dollars and they don't overspend those dollars in the current year. If they do overspend those dollars, then it's generally the school itself that's responsible for paying for that extra cost. A big one that tends to happen is copies. If you have a school that you receive, let's say, $5,000 for school copies. I mean, that's a low figure here. You receive $5,000, but your teachers make lots of copies. It might go over that, and so you would, as a school, have to be responsible for covering anything above that. So that's an expense. Besides what you get from the district, there's generally some identified accounts that you'll set up. High schools are pretty big about having lots of accounts. You have, Beta Club account. You'll have the yearbook account. You'll have all these things that are fixed accounts, and the dollars that come into those particular accounts can only go for those specific accounts. So if we sell 100 yearbooks, and we receive the dollars to go to the yearbooks, it has to cover the cost of the yearbook. There might be some slight profit for the school, but generally speaking, it's to cover the cost of the yearbook. And then you cannot, as a principal, you have the flexibility in a lot of areas to shift money from one area to another area, but there are those restricted codes like yearbook where you cannot do that. You don't have the responsibility. But again, let's just say you have, let's say you charge for parking fees. Again, on my high school days, you charge for parking fees of $25, and it doesn't cost you anything for the parking lot. I mean, the parking lot's already paid. You already have lines. You might use it for things that do occur throughout the years as far as your parking lot. Maybe your lines have gotten dull and you need to repaint them. But generally speaking, that's money that you can use for other things. Or money that you received in athletics. You can shift some of those monies around. You want to make sure you cover all your referees, your transportation, and everything associated with athletics. But you do have the freedom as a principal to shift some monies around here. That's, when you have to look at putting together a project, like some of the things that you have exhibited in your artifacts, you have to make sure the dollars aren't just magically appear. You have to account as a school principal. If we're going to do this project or this project, I have to know what those human resource costs are going to be. I have to know what those other types of costs would be, financial costs would be, and you've also got to account for what are the possibilities of things that could happen that could increase those costs to make sure I have enough money in that budget to cover that. I always made sure I was very conservative. I've always made sure I had money to cover the for the projects that I had to deal with, and generally speaking, wanted to have a few extra dollars. Now, let's just say you have extra dollars at the end of the year, monies that aren't having to be spent. You have to spend your state dollars first, then you have to spend your local dollars, generally in your school district. But then you have your own school dollars. So school dollar that you've raised, you can put those sort of in a rainy day fund at your bookkeeper in a savings. You don't want to have that large of a savings, depending on what level. With elementary would have a certain level, middle would have a certain level, and high school would have your higher level, because high school is going to be taking in probably the most money of any of those levels when it comes to athletics. So you can put some of those monies away, but you have to keep it, sort of a certain percentage that you want to keep it at, because those monies are meant to be spent for the students. So those are some things you have to consider. I would say the biggest thing, why this class I think is so important here is that not taking responsibility for the accounts, not knowing what dollars from your accounts can get you into trouble, can get you in sometimes a position where you may lose your job because you're not watching your dollars wisely. I would always ask for a weekly report from my bookkeeper as to give me the chart of accounts for everything that I've got, including the restricted funds or not restricted, because even the restricted funds, I want to make sure the people that are responsible for spending those dollars are keeping those in the black and they don't go into red, or they don't lose dollars, so to speak. Anyway, that's a little bit about the budget from the school side of things. I would encourage you, according to the discussion question this week, is to look at school budget. I would encourage to see if your principal will share with you sort of that chart of accounts that they get for the school. Each of your bookkeepers can run specific reports that can kind of show you what dollars amount. You know, your principal may not share it with you, but you can look at other reports that have your general school on there. So I'd encourage you to look at that. That's for the question anyway this week. It's on the discussion board. Other than that, again, just encourage you to make sure that you look over the syllabus for this week and making sure that you're getting all your assignments in before the end of class. I have really enjoyed this this way of doing class. You've been a great group. Your folks have you folks are really good about getting your assignments in, and I do appreciate that. It makes it good to be able to kind of keep a constant flow of assignments in to keep up with. So I'll have everything finished up this week, and I wish you the best of luck in your next class. If you have any further questions this week that you need clarification on, please feel free to email me. Please feel free to call me. Thanks a lot, and take care. Have a great week. Bye-bye.